Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming along. My day job is public policy editor of The Economist, but like you tonight, I'm here to listen and learn from a very fascinating debate, which I'm sure you'll agree. A natural gas revolution, hot air, or a dose of sanity? First of all, I would like to introduce our first speaker tonight. That's Wim Thomas, who's Chief Energy Advisor at Shell and head of the Energy Analysis Team at Shell's Global Scenario.
Just let me say a few of the key messages. I mean, a lot of people think that you still have to wait for new breakthrough technology, and I don't think that's the case. We have the existing technologies, but they have to break through. And that doesn't come by itself. And unconventional gas in America was a big surprise to everyone, say, in the last decade. But the first pioneers were already out there trying to develop the technology in the 80s. So it takes a few decades, about 3 decades, for new technology to really come through. And that's a very normal time span in the energy industry to actually have new technologies coming on stream to about 1% market share when it actually becomes competitive with existing incumbents. So bear that in mind, 3 decades before it becomes competitive, another 3 decades before it actually reaches a natural market share. So it's a really intergenerational game. Then my second key point is actually that gas will be a backbone of sustainable energy systems of the future. Why do I say that? Well, gas is abundant and affordable, etc. But if you want to have more and more renewables, intermittent renewables in your system, you need a kind of backbone and flexible backup source which can actually take up that flexibility very cost efficiently. Now, we have done a lot of scenario exercises, and every time, right, you see that actually gas is a very good cost-effective way to actually deal with the intermittency. But also we see some kind of natural saturation points in certain sectors of renewables. So when people say 100% renewables for everything is possible, I doubt it, and certainly not in the next 20 years. But if unconventional gas is successful, it really doubles the previous thought resource base of gas, and then it really makes it a real game changer. You can really go for a different type of energy systems in a sense that you can, early gains, replace coal by gas. But as you build a big infrastructure system on gas, also you start opening up options for the future. I would call it, say, you have room to maneuver in 2020s, 2030s, because you have a gas infrastructure which is also easily, as little extra cost, they make suitable for hydrogen gas or liquid hydrogen. So actually, you may count you're lucky because you have an infrastructure you can piggyback on. If you do another route, then you don't have that infrastructure, and then it becomes very expensive to introduce hydrogen.
Joining us now, Professor Mike Stevenson, who is Head of Science and Energy at the British Geological Survey.
So, to a bit of science, I'm sorry to show you a graph so early, but this is a famous graph from Pakala and Sokolow's science paper from 2004. Many of you will have seen this. It's a very clever paper. Some people don't like it now, but at the time it was very good, because what they did was they took the business as usual, which is the ruinous high CO2 emissions rate, which might end us up with a very high temperature rise. And they also drew a graph of the 500 parts per million stabilization level. So in other words, a level of how emissions might increase in the future and how they might be stabilized to develop only a 500 parts per million, which would be safe. And then they divided that triangle up, which they called the stabilization triangle, into a series of wedges, which they called stabilization wedges. And these wedges are a bit like a scientific unit of climate abatement, if you like. And what you would do is you take one off, and if you do that, then your problem gets less. If you take 2 off, then you're getting nearer to your ideal level. So what is a wedge? Well, a wedge would be doubling global nuclear power. A wedge would be converting 2 billion cars from 30 miles per gallon to 60 miles per gallon. So 2 billion smart cars instead of 2 billion Lamborghinis. Another one is CCS on 800 power stations. And another one is gas. And you've got to give them credit for this because they recognized the value of gas in 2004. They said, if you replace a substantial number of coal power stations with gas power stations, in fact, 1,500 gigawatts worth of 50% efficient coal power stations, you will get a wedge. But there is a problem, and this is where I'm going to make my pitch to you. There's a real problem with these wedges. I said that there are several wedges that have been described. 1, shale gas. 2, nuclear, double global nuclear power. 3, 800 CCS operations on 800 power stations. Unfortunately, the public won't have it because all those 3 things, nuclear, shale gas, and CCS, all of them have the same problem, the same lack of belief amongst the public, and that might feed through to policymakers and investors as well. They worry about it. The earth is scary. People are frightened of earthquakes. Look at this. A Somerset expert reckons that if you do shale gas in the Mendips, it'll turn into a volcano. And people believe it. I am arguing that science needs to take a stronger role in this, particularly independent science, to assess the risk and to do it publicly and transparently and openly, and to talk about what's low risk, things we don't have to worry about, like volcanoes and Blackpool disappearing under the Irish Sea. High-risk things, and there are high-risk things. There are things that we should worry about, you know, like methane getting into water supplies, for example. These are things we should think about. But the trouble is the debate is we're veering over to these ridiculous things, and we get distracted, and you know, what matters is the difference between these 2 things. If we did that, we might get a better quality debate. We might actually get better policy as well.
Very good time to hear from our next speaker, which is Dr. Shamil Yenikeyev, who is Research Fellow at the Oxford Institute of Energy Studies. And his forthcoming book is The Battle for Russian Oil, Corporations, Regions and the State.
Does gas help or hinder making the world a safer place? Obviously, the increased availability of supplies and the increased diversity of sources is a very important factor. And because gas producers are becoming more responsible, being more responsible by this new competition. And producer-consumer relations as a result and mutual dependence will create greater stability. At the same time, some transnational pipelines, such as Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India pipeline, could promote as well integration and stability in those regions. But one final point is that the battles will continue, but there will be battles based around markets, routes, regulation, technology, competitive advantage and prices, and environment. And domestic politics will play the key role in that, particularly in the United States and Russia.
You stick with us for the last part of the debate, and I'm going to welcome to the stage with me Dr. Pierre Noël, who is Senior Research Associate and Director of Energy Policy Forum at the University of Cambridge, specialising in oil and gas markets and industry, and David Howe, Lord Howe, who's an advisor to the Foreign Secretary on energy security and a former Minister of State at the Foreign Office with responsibility for international energy issues.
These are all the problems if you go the wrong way, which we've been going in many areas of attempting to subsidise renewables. The future, if we want to get CO2 down, it's got to be step by step, it's got to be politically practical, it's got to be based for the minute on gas now and technology later. That's all we need. That's all we need. Gas and technology.
Last thought from you, Pierre.
Yeah. So
not everything else is a byway.
You've said time and again, it's all about technology. The cost has to go down. It's not going down magically. It's going down if you throw money at it, lots of money at it. Who pays for that? The cost of technology is not going to go down like that. So we cannot go around the problem. This is a serious policy problem because it's very expensive.
Chinese technology is bringing down the price, and there are many other areas where we can get the price down. I agree, it needs government support, that's absolutely right, but it's much better spending money that way than subsidising useless wind farms and offshore farms, which are wildly
but
expensive.
This is
We've got that. 10
10
seconds to finish your point. Come on, we all need to go and have some dinner.
It is very heavy German subsidies for solar that brought the Chinese in and the prices down. It's not magic.
It's technology.
It's not magic at all, but I do hope that we have generated at least a bit of light as well as rather a lot of heat, particularly at the end of our debate tonight. Look, thanks to all our speakers and, of course, to Intelligence Squared and Shell for hosting this event, which I've certainly enjoyed very much and hope you have. We would be very grateful if you could fill in the feedback forms, which are on your chairs or probably under your chairs by now if you got agitated and kicked them out of the way. And thank you all so much for coming. Safe journey home.